Let me tell you something. The most dangerous prisons in the world are not made of concrete and steel. They're built inside our minds. They're made of patterns we repeat without even knowing we're doing it. Patterns of hesitation, patterns of fear, patterns of self-doubt. And if you don't disrupt them, if you don't replace them, they will quietly steal years of your life. I've met people who weren't held back by lack of talent, lack of opportunity, or lack of intelligence. They were held back by one thing, the patterns they kept reliving, the ones they thought were just who they are. And the moment you believe that lie, you hand your power away. But here's the truth. You are not your patterns. You are the one who created them. And anything you create, you can recreate. Anything you repeat, you can replace. Anything you're stuck in, you can break out of the moment you decide you're done living in that old version of yourself. Because disruption, real disruption, doesn't start with destroying your life. It starts by interrupting the story that has kept you small. You ever catch yourself in the middle of a moment thinking, why do I keep doing this? That's your awakening. That's your mind screaming. This isn't you anymore. But most people ignore that voice. They feel the discomfort, and instead of seeing it as a signal to evolve, they treat it like a punishment. Growth isn't punishment. Change isn't punishment. It's a call to rise. The pattern isn't the enemy. The pattern is the teacher. It shows up to reveal what needs healing, what needs upgrading, what needs letting go. But you can't change what you won't look at. You can't heal what you keep avoiding. And you can't rewrite a pattern you keep pretending is harmless. So I want you to think, really think about the pattern that has been running your life. Is it the pattern of reacting instead of responding? The pattern of telling yourself you'll start tomorrow? The pattern of shrinking your voice so others feel comfortable? The pattern of replaying the same emotional wounds as if they're still happening today? Disruption happens the moment you refuse to keep participating in that old script. It starts with awareness, the courage to say, this is the pattern that's been stopping me. The second step is breaking the stay, shifting your energy in an instant. Your mind can't stay stuck if your body is in motion. You change your breath, you change your physiology, you change your focus, and suddenly the pattern loses its grip. Your emotional home begins to shift. You're no longer fueled by fear, you're fueled by possibility. Then comes replacement. Nature hates a vacuum. You can't just stop a negative pattern. You must replace it with something stronger, something aligned with who you're becoming. If the old pattern was hesitation, the new one becomes decisive action. If the old one was self-criticism, the new one becomes self-command. If the old one was avoidance, the new one becomes courageous engagement. You don't negotiate with old patterns. You override them by installing new ones through repetition and intensity. You want to grow? Then stop rehearsing the identity that's keeping you small. Stop letting familiar pain feel safer than unfamiliar progress. You're capable of more than the pattern you've been living in. You're capable of interrupting it in a single moment, this moment, by deciding to act from the version of you that already exists inside, waiting to be unleashed. Every transformation begins with a disruption. But every breakthrough demands a replacement, a new way of thinking, a new emotional home, a new standard for how you show up. You don't need permission. You don't need perfection. You need a decision. And once you make it, once you say, this pattern ends with me, everything in your life begins to reorganize around that new level of you. Because the moment you disrupt the pattern, the moment you step into the replacement, you don't just change your behavior, you change your destiny. Disrupting negative patterns begins with recognizing the moment you're repeating an old story and choosing a new state instantly. And most people never realize how much power is hidden inside that single moment of awareness. Because the truth is, negative patterns don't control your life by force. They control it through repetition, through familiarity, through the quiet assumption that this is just how I am. And the moment you pause long enough to notice the pattern as it's happening, you've already broken 50% of its power. Awareness is the doorway to disruption. But most people are moving so fast, reacting out of habit, that they never catch themselves in the act. They don't see the loop until they're already deep inside it. The key is to train yourself to recognize the emotional cues, the tightness in your body, the tone of your self-talk, the familiar script that starts playing in your mind. When you can name the pattern, you can interrupt it. When you can see the story, you can rewrite it. Think about how many times you've reacted before thinking, made decisions from fear, avoided opportunities, or talked yourself out of something you truly wanted, not because you weren't capable, but because an old, outdated pattern hijacked your state. Patterns thrive in unconsciousness. They thrive when you're not paying attention. The moment you bring presence to the behavior, you strip the pattern of its automatic power. You interrupt its rhythm. You create space between the stimulus and your response. And in that space, your entire life can pivot. But awareness alone isn't enough. You have to change your state immediately, Becca. Use the pattern lives in your emotional home. If your emotional home is stress, you will return to stress. If it's doubt, you'll return to doubt. If it's fear, you'll return to fear. Your body remembers what you practice. So the moment you recognize the pattern, you must disrupt it physically, emotionally, and mentally. Change your breath, change your posture, move your body, shift your energy with certainty. Your physiology is the steering wheel of your mind, and if you want to break a negative pattern, you must interrupt the physical state that keeps it alive. You've got to train your nervous system to understand that the old story is no longer the default. When you feel hesitation rising, you interrupt it with action. When you feel self-doubt creeping in, you interrupt it with a more powerful internal command. When you sense your mind replaying an old narrative of limitation, you switch the channel before it builds momentum. Because negative patterns gather strength through repetition, and the only way to break them is to disrupt that repetition in real time. The faster you interrupt, the weaker the pattern becomes. Over time, the brain stops reaching for the old pathway because you stopped feeding it. You've denied it the energy it was used to receiving. This is where emotional mastery comes in. You must become the observer of your inner world, not just the participant. You must be able to say, this isn't me, this is the old program, and in that moment, you reclaim your power. It's not about being perfect, it's about being aware. It's about noticing the first signs of the old pattern trying to pull you back into the identity you've outgrown. It's about choosing a new emotional home, one built on clarity, strength, decisiveness, and conscious intention. You can't disrupt a pattern from the same state that created it. You must elevate your energy, shift your FF. Focus, activate the part of you that knows you are more powerful than the story you've been living in. And the beautiful thing is, this can happen in a single breath, a single shift in posture, a single moment of self-interruption. You do not need time to disrupt a pattern. You need a decision. You need presence. You need the willingness to say, this ends now. Not as a dramatic declaration, but as a genuine shift in your internal state that changes what you will and will not tolerate moving forward. Because in every moment you recognize and interrupt the old story, you carve a new path in your mind, a new way of responding, a new emotional identity that reflects the person you were always capable of becoming long before the pattern ever took hold. Replacing old patterns requires installing a stronger, empowering habit that aligns with your highest identity and repeating it until it becomes your new standard. Because the truth is, you can't just delete a pattern and hope the space it leaves behind stays empty. The human mind doesn't work that way. The moment a pattern is disrupted, something else must take its place. And if you don't consciously choose what that something is, your brain will default right back to the familiar, even if that familiar has been limiting you for years. Replacement is about intention. It's about choosing who you are becoming instead of unconsciously returning to who you were. It's about building a new emotional and behavioral home that supports your growth, not your stagnation. Think about what happens when someone stops a habit like procrastination or overthinking or doubting themselves. If they simply try to stop without giving themselves a new action to take, they end up stuck in the same loop. The old pattern sneaks back in because it has nothing pushing against it. That is why installing a new empowering pattern is essential. If the old pattern was hesitation, then the new one must be immediate action. If the old pattern was negativity, the new one must be conscious reframing. If the old pattern was fear, the new one must be courageous movement. Patterns don't disappear. They get replaced through repetition, intensity, and alignment with a new identity you choose boldly and repeatedly. And here's the key. The replacement isn't just an action, it's a state. It's an emotional foundation. It's a shift in who you believe yourself to be. If you keep trying to install new habits without upgrading the identity behind them, they won't stick. The old version of you will keep pulling you back. But when you decide that the identity you are stepping into is stronger, clearer, more disciplined, more purpose-driven than the one you're leaving behind, then the new pattern has the emotional fuel it needs to take root. Identity drives behavior, and behavior becomes pattern. So replacing a pattern is really about choosing a new identity and backing it up with repeated action until your brain recognizes it as the new normal. This is where consistency matters more than perfection. The brain learns through repetition, not through intensity alone. You don't become a new version of yourself by doing something empowering once. You become it by doing it again and again until it becomes effortless, automatic, non-negotiable. Every time you repeat the new behavior, you deepen the neurological pathway. You reinforce the identity. You make the old pattern less relevant, less accessible, less compelling, and eventually, what once felt forced becomes natural, and what once felt foreign becomes familiar. Replacement also requires clarity. You need to know exactly what behavior you're choosing instead of the old one. If your old pattern is reacting with anger or frustration, what is the new pattern? Is it pausing? Is it B, breathing? Is it responding with curiosity instead of judgment? The clearer you are, the faster your nervous system learns. If your old pattern was avoiding discomfort, what is the new action you commit to? Leaning in, taking the first step immediately, asking yourself a powerful question instead of retreating. The more specific the replacement, the easier it becomes to act on it when the old pattern tries to pull you back. And then there's reinforcement. The emotional reward your brain receives when you choose the new pattern. Celebrate the shift. Acknowledge the change. Your brain is wired to repeat what feels rewarding. And when you consciously reinforce your new behavior with positive emotion, you accelerate the installation of the new pattern. You teach your mind that this new identity feels powerful, feels expansive, feels aligned with who you want to be. Replacing a pattern is not about willpower, it's about design. You're designing a new version of yourself through intentional repetition. You're training your mind and body to operate from a higher standard. And at first, it might feel uncomfortable, unfamiliar, even unnatural. But discomfort is not a sign that you're failing, it's a sign that you're rewiring. It's a sign that the old pattern is losing its grip and the new one is taking shape. And every time you repeat the new action, every time you choose the higher identity, every time you act in alignment with the person you're becoming, you weaken the grip of the old pattern and strengthen the foundation of the new one. Over time, this becomes your default, your emotional home, your new way of being.